At midnight, most doors stay closed. But when she knocked and said she knew I was still awake, I realized some moments wait their whole lives for the right second. Midnight always changes the shape of a room. The apartment felt smaller at that hour, not in a suffocating way, but like it was holding its breath with me. The lights were low, just the soft amber glow from the lamp near the couch, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the city had finally settled into something resembling sleep. No car horns, no distant laughter. Just the faint hum of electricity in the walls and the steady ticking of the clock I kept meaning to replace. I was alone but not at ease. My phone lay face down on the table, screen dark, yet I kept glancing at it as if it might light up on its own. Earlier that evening, she had stood near the doorway longer than necessary. Not close enough to be obvious. Not far enough to feel accidental. She had asked if I was getting enough rest lately, her voice gentle, almost casual. But her eyes stayed on me as though the question carried something deeper. When she finally left, her hand had brushed my arm in passing. Not a grab. Just a quiet, lingering touch that left warmth behind long after the door closed. I told myself it didn't mean anything. She was someone who moved through the world with confidence earned over years. Someone who knew how to pause before speaking, how to listen without interrupting. I admired that about her. Maybe more than I should have. I had felt it growing for weeks, that subtle pull, the way conversations with her felt heavier than they should, like they mattered in a way I couldn't explain. Still, midnight wasn't a time for expectations. Midnight was for letting go of them. I tried to distract myself. I rinsed a mug that didn't need washing. I straightened a stack of papers already aligned. The air felt cool against my forearms, and I realized I hadn't put on a jacket earlier. Or maybe I had, and I just hadn't noticed the cold until now. My thoughts kept circling back to her, her steady presence, the softness she revealed only in rare moments, like when she laughed quietly at her own jokes. The clock clicked over to 12. I exhaled slowly, as if that single breath might release whatever tension had settled in my chest. Nothing was going to happen. I knew that. People didn't show up after midnight. They didn't cross invisible lines without warning. I turned off another light, leaving the room even dimmer, and leaned back against the couch. Then I heard it. Not loud, not urgent, just a deliberate knock at the door. Measured, confident, impossible to ignore. My heart reacted before my mind could catch up. I didn't move right away. I just stood there listening, every sense sharpened. A second passed. Then her voice, calm and certain, slipped through the door. "Open up," she said softly. "I know you're still awake." And in that moment, the quiet of the room shattered. Not into chaos, but into possibility. I stayed still for a moment longer than I should have. Not because I didn't want to open the door, but because opening it felt like crossing a line I'd been tracing in my mind for weeks. Her words lingered in the air, calm and assured, as if she already knew the answer. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but loud in my ears, and I wondered if she could sense it from the other side. I took a breath and stepped forward. When I opened the door, she was standing there exactly as she always did, composed, self-possessed. But there was something different tonight. The hallway light framed her softly, catching the edges of her face, the subtle lines that spoke of experience rather than age. She wore a light coat, not fully closed, as if she hadn't planned to be out long. Her hair wasn't styled the way it usually was, just loosely tucked back, a few strands falling free near her cheek. She looked at me for a second before speaking, her gaze steady but searching. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said, though her tone suggested she already knew she wasn't. "No," I replied quickly, then slowed myself. "I mean, no. I was just here." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Not playful, not teasing, something gentler. She shifted her weight slightly, and I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders, like she'd braced herself before knocking. That alone told me this hadn't been an easy decision. The hallway felt cooler than my apartment, and when she stepped closer, that contrast followed her inside. She didn't cross the threshold right away. She paused, as if waiting for permission that I hadn't yet given. But my body moved before my words could. I stepped aside, opening the space. "Come in," I said. As she passed me, her sleeve brushed against my wrist. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a quiet awareness through me, the kind that settles deep rather than sparking all at once. She smelled faintly of something warm, lavender, maybe, mixed with the night air, and for a second, I forgot to close the door behind her. The apartment felt different with her in it. Smaller, warmer, charged in a way I hadn't expected. She glanced around, taking in the dim light, the half-cleaned mug on the table, the undone normalcy of my space. "You weren't asleep," she said softly, more an observation than a question. "No," I admitted. "I don't think I could have been." She turned toward me then, fully, her expression open but careful. There was a vulnerability there she didn't often show, the kind that comes from choosing to be present rather than protected. "I waited," she said after a pause. "I told myself if your light was still on, I'd knock." I nodded, understanding more than I could articulate. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with meaning, with everything we hadn't said yet. We stood there, just a few feet apart. The door closed behind her, midnight settling quietly around us. And I realized this wasn't just a visit. It was a moment neither of us had rushed into, only finally allowed to arrive. For a few seconds after the door closed, neither of us moved. It wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, like we were both waiting to feel the shape of the moment before stepping fully into it. She stood just inside the apartment, her back near the door, hands loosely folded in front of her. I remained a pace away, close enough to sense her presence but not close enough to touch. The space between us felt intentional, carefully measured, and yet charged in a way that made me acutely aware of my own breathing. She glanced up at me, then away, as if giving herself time to gather her thoughts. The hallway light still filtered in faintly through the crack beneath the door, outlining her silhouette. There was a calmness in the way she carried herself, years of knowing how to hold space without demanding it. But tonight that calm had a softness to it, something unguarded. "I wasn't sure I should come," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't apologetic. It was honest. I nodded, leaning back slightly against the wall, giving her room even as my body resisted the distance. "I wasn't sure I should answer," I admitted. Saying it out loud felt like easing a knot I'd been holding all evening. That earned a small, thoughtful smile from her. She looked at me more closely then, her eyes tracing my face as if checking for something. Certainty, maybe, or reassurance that this wasn't a mistake. When our gazes met, neither of us looked away right away. The silence stretched, warm and unhurried. She took a step forward. It wasn't much, just enough to shift the air between us. I noticed the faint sound of her breath as she exhaled, the subtle movement of her coat as it settled against her frame. My arm hung at my side, and suddenly I was intensely aware of how close her sleeve was. Close enough that another step would mean contact. "You always think too much," she said gently, not as criticism but recognition. I let out a quiet laugh. "Only when something matters." Her eyes softened at that. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she lifted her hand, hesitating for the briefest moment before resting her fingertips lightly against my forearm. The touch was careful, almost exploratory, but it sent a steady warmth through me. Not a spark, something deeper, something grounding. "Is this okay?" she asked, her thumb barely moving, as if ready to pull back at any sign of hesitation. I swallowed and nodded. "Yeah, it is." She didn't move closer after that. She didn't need to. The connection was already there, humming quietly in the space we shared. Her hand remained where it was, and I could feel the gentle pressure, the reassurance in it. The way she touched wasn't rushed or demanding. It was patient, as if she understood that closeness didn't need to be loud to be meaningful. We stood like that for a while, suspended between what had been and what might come next. I became aware of the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened, the way her gaze softened when it rested on me. This wasn't about crossing boundaries. It was about standing right at the edge of them together. Eventually, she let her hand fall back to her side, but the warmth lingered. The apartment felt quieter now, not empty, but full in a new way. And as we finally moved deeper into the room, side by side but not touching, I realized that the closeness we just shared had already changed something. The doorway behind us felt less like an entrance, and more like a threshold we'd crossed without ever needing to say it aloud. We didn't decide to sit down so much as let it happen. She moved first, easing onto the edge of the couch, her coat slipping open as she settled. I followed a moment later, leaving a careful space between us, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to pretend we were still being cautious. The lamp cast a soft glow across the room, catching the curve of her cheek, the thoughtful line of her mouth as she looked down at her hands. For a while, we just listened to the quiet. "I almost turned back," she said finally, her voice low, meant only for me. "I stood outside longer than I'd like to admit." I turned slightly toward her. "What made you knock anyway?" She considered the question, fingers interlacing, then separating again. "Because pretending I didn't feel this started to feel worse than whatever might happen if I acknowledged it." That honesty landed gently but deeply. I felt it settle in my chest, stirring something I'd been trying to keep contained. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, grounding myself. I didn't know what to do with it either, I admitted. Part of me kept saying it was just admiration, respect, but I trailed off, unsure how to finish without sounding reckless. "But it didn't stay that simple," she said, finishing the thought for me. I nodded. "No, it didn't." She looked up then, really looked at me. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, and something like relief. She shifted slightly closer, not enough to touch, but enough that the space between us felt intentional again. "I'm used to being the one who knows better," she said softly. "The one who pauses, who thinks ahead." Her smile was faint, almost self-aware. Tonight, I wanted to let myself not know for once. The vulnerability in her voice changed the air between us. I reached out without fully realizing it, stopping just short of touching her hand, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Instead, she turned her palm upward, an invitation as quiet as it was brave. Our fingers met. The contact was gentle, unhurried. Her hand was warm, steady, and when our fingers curled together, it felt less like a decision and more like a recognition. She exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing as if she'd been holding tension there all evening. "I was afraid you'd think this was a mistake," she said. I squeezed her hand lightly. "I think it's honest." That made her smile, fully this time. She leaned back slightly, still holding my hand, her thumb brushing once across my knuckles in a small, unconscious motion. The gesture sent a quiet reassurance through me, grounding and intimate all at once. We talked like that for a while, about timing, about the things we'd both noticed but never said, about how different our lives looked on the surface, and how similar they felt in the quiet moments. Our voices stayed low, not because we had to whisper, but because the conversation demanded care. At some point, she rested her shoulder lightly against mine. It wasn't dramatic, just a shift of weight, a shared warmth. I felt the gentle pressure of her there, the trust in it, and something inside me eased. The hesitation didn't vanish, but it softened, shaped now by connection instead of fear. And in that quiet, honest closeness, I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't about rushing forward. It was about finally standing still together and telling the truth. The conversation slowed, not because there was nothing left to say, but because words had begun to feel less necessary. Her shoulder remained against mine, a quiet, reassuring weight. I was aware of every small detail, the way her breath rose and fell, the subtle warmth where our arms nearly touched, the soft fabric of her coat brushing my sleeve when she shifted. The room felt smaller now, not confining, but intimate, as if it had gently closed in around us to hold the moment steady. She glanced down at our hands, still loosely joined, and smiled to herself. "It's strange," she murmured, "how something this simple can feel so significant." I nodded. Maybe because we didn't rush it. She turned her hands slightly in mine, our fingers fitting together more naturally than I expected. Her thumb traced a slow, thoughtful line along the side of my hand, the movement barely there but deeply felt. It wasn't teasing. It was grounding, like she was confirming that this was real, that we were both present in it. After a moment, she leaned her head against my shoulder. The contact was careful at first, almost tentative, as if she was giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I adjusted just enough to make the space more comfortable, feeling the gentle pressure of her cheek settle in. The warmth of her there surprised me. Not in intensity, but in how right it felt. Calm, steady. I could feel her breathing slow, her body relaxing into the closeness. It made something in my chest loosen too, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying until it began to fade. "This feels safe," she said quietly, almost to herself. "It does," I agreed. I lifted my free hand, hesitating only briefly before resting it lightly against her upper arm. The touch was deliberate and slow, my fingers barely curving around her sleeve. I could feel the warmth beneath the fabric, the solid reassurance of her presence. She didn't flinch. Instead, she shifted a little closer, her head fitting more comfortably against me. For a while, we stayed like that. No dramatic gestures, no sudden movements, just shared stillness. The lamp hummed softly. Somewhere outside, a car passed in the distance, but it felt far away, like the rest of the world had politely stepped back. Her hand tightened slightly in mine, not gripping, just enough to let me know she was aware of the moment too. I rested my cheek lightly against the top of her head, careful not to crowd her, and she let out a small, contented breath. There was something deeply intimate about the simplicity of it, the trust in her leaning on me, the care in the way I held her. It wasn't about crossing a boundary. It was about acknowledging one that already existed between us. Eventually, she lifted her head just enough to look up at me. Our faces were close now, closer than they'd been all night. Her eyes searched mine, not for permission, but for understanding. I smiled softly, and she returned it, warmth spreading across her expression. No kiss followed. None was needed. The first meaningful touch had already said everything that mattered. And in that quiet closeness, I felt it clearly. Whatever this was becoming, it was being built gently, honestly, and together. After that first touch, something shifted in the room. The hesitation that had hovered over us all evening softened, replaced by a quiet certainty neither of us had dared to name before. We still weren't moving fast. There was no urgency, but the air between us hummed with an unspoken understanding. It was as if every glance, every small shift of weight, carried the weight of a decision we were finally ready to make together. She straightened slightly on the couch, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The motion was delicate, practiced, yet somehow intimate in the soft light. I watched her, noticing the slight curve of her cheek, the subtle warmth in her eyes that mirrored my own. She caught my gaze, and for a heartbeat, we held it, letting the silence carry the words we weren't saying. "I wasn't sure if tonight was right," she admitted, her voice low, careful, and yet infused with a quiet vulnerability. "But I'm here anyway." Her honesty struck me, the way she admitted fear without letting it weaken her, and I felt my own walls begin to fall away. I reached toward her slowly, my hand hovering for a moment over hers, letting her choose the pace. When our fingers intertwined again, it wasn't tentative this time. It was deliberate. It was a choice we were making together. "I've been thinking about this," I said softly, "about whether I should let myself feel this, and I realized I don't want to wait anymore. Not if you don't either." She leaned closer, the movement almost imperceptible, but enough for her shoulder to brush mine. The contact sent a quiet warmth through me, steady and grounding. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching mine, and I could see the unspoken question lingering there. "Are we really doing this?" I answered without words, brushing a hand lightly across her cheek. My fingers rested there for a moment, tracing the gentle line of her jaw, careful not to rush, not to intrude. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel it. The contact, the intention, the trust. When she opened them again, she smiled softly, relief and affirmation mingling in the curve of her lips. We shifted slightly, sitting closer now, our knees brushing, the proximity intimate but not forced. Every gesture felt measured, deliberate, as if we were learning the rhythm of each other's comfort. Her hand slid from mine to rest lightly on my forearm, a grounding touch that carried more weight than 1,000 words. "I like that we're taking this slowly," she murmured. "It makes it real." I nodded, understanding entirely. Slow didn't mean hesitant. It meant mindful. It meant choosing each step together rather than letting the moment sweep us away. And in that shared choice, I felt a depth of connection I hadn't known was possible. Her head tilted toward me again, and I leaned slightly closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It was a simple gesture, but it held meaning. Attention, care, tenderness. She leaned into it, meeting me in the quiet intimacy of the moment. For the first time all night, I felt a steady calm settle over me. The hesitation, the fear of doing something wrong, the weight of external perception, all of it faded. In the soft glow of the lamp, with her so close, I realized that the choice we had made together wasn't about rushing or giving in. It was about presence, about trust, about finally allowing ourselves to simply exist here, together without fear. And in that slow, deliberate closeness, we understood that tonight marked the beginning of something real. By the time the clock hands crept past 1, the room felt transformed. Midnight had long passed, yet neither of us had noticed. The lamp's soft glow painted warm shadows across the walls, flickering slightly as the city outside settled into a deeper silence. The apartment no longer felt like just a space. It felt like a haven, shaped by the quiet, shared moments that had accumulated over the night. She leaned back against the couch, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. I could feel the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, a rhythm that had become familiar and grounding. My arm draped naturally across the back of the couch, brushing against her hair, and the contact sent a subtle reassurance through both of us. It was unspoken, tender, and entirely deliberate, the kind of touch that says more than words ever could. "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this," she whispered, almost to herself. There was no embarrassment in her voice, only quiet wonder. "I didn't know it could be so easy to just be here with someone." I smiled, feeling the warmth spread in my chest. "Easy doesn't mean less meaningful," I said softly. "It just feels right." Her fingers found mine again, intertwining in a comfortable, natural way. It was the same gesture that had started this slow, careful intimacy earlier in the night, but now it carried the weight of shared understanding. Neither of us had rushed, neither had forced anything, and in that patience something profound had taken root. We talked quietly then, not about anything urgent, not about plans or obligations, just small things, the quiet music of distant cars, the smell of the city air slipping through the slightly open window, the softness of the couch beneath us. Her laugh came occasionally, light and genuine, filling the room in a way that made the silence between words feel less empty. Each laugh, each small gesture, reinforced the connection we'd built without needing to define it. At one point, she rested her head fully against my chest, her hair brushing against my collarbone. I could feel the steady thump of her heartbeat beneath my hand, and it matched the rhythm of my own, slow and steady. The warmth, the trust, the quiet vulnerability. It was all there, not forced, not hurried, simply existing in the same space. "Do you think we'll regret tonight?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with the faintest uncertainty. I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. "I think this, whatever this is, started exactly as it should." Her smile returned, faint but certain. She lifted her head slightly, enough for our eyes to meet, and for a long moment we simply looked at each other. There was no need for words. Every glance, every small movement, spoke volumes. We had crossed that threshold together, slowly, carefully, and with intention. Hours passed unnoticed. The world outside had gone on without us, but in this little apartment, time had paused. The quiet intimacy, the gentle touches, the shared laughter and whispered confessions. They had all woven together into something enduring. Finally, she shifted just slightly, nudging me lightly. "I should probably leave soon," she said, though neither of us wanted the night to end. "Stay a little longer," I murmured, and she laughed softly, pressing her hand to mine again before settling back. And there we stayed, after midnight, still awake, still together, finding a warmth neither of us had anticipated but both had quietly hoped for. In that stillness, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most extraordinary moments aren't marked by drama or grand gestures. They are marked by trust, by presence, by simply allowing someone into your world and letting them stay. Tonight, we had done exactly that. And it was enough. If you felt the quiet magic of the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another slow burn romance. And tell me in the comments, have you ever shared a moment that changed everything? Just like this one,